LeBron James all the way in.
And here comes Simmons the other way, 3-on-2. Simmons eludes the defender and lays it in with that.
Certainly the length altered that shot. Out of the quick steps and crunches.
Play right there. Porzingis from Jennings. Throw down and a foul.
Irving, splits the defense with the dribble.
All right, guys, we're back here now. Let's talk about something that we were discussing in our power rankings, and that is, or I guess I mentioned it in the intro, but
Something like that.
we're talking about Brad Stevens here. I think I went on a little bit of a controversial saying that he's going to be the best coach ever at the beginning of the show, but do you believe that he is the best coach right now in the NBA this season? Maybe not this season, but maybe the past 4 or 5 seasons, however long he's been there. Since like 2014.
No. He's the second best, though.
Second best.
The Popovich is the best. But I think Coach Pop is the best coach of all time.
Right.
I mean, he's working with a team that's even less talented than, I guess some people would probably argue this, but I think they're less talented than the Celtics, right? Mm-hmm. Without Kawhi. And they're winning just as much, not as much, I guess. I'm fucking it all up. But he's still beating really good teams with what he has right now.
Right.
Marcus Aldridge is his best player.
Mm-hmm.
And they're beating really good competition. And I mean, they're 10-6, I think. That's a good record considering you're missing your one real star player. And like I said earlier, he's definitely able to play. Kawhi, that is definitely able to play right now. But they're being extra cautious about using him because they want him to be full strength for the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
They want to win the championship, which they have a good shot at.
Right.
So, I think it's hard to take it away from Popovich right now.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows where he's going to be in 3 years? He might retire. There's a good chance he's getting kind of up there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, who knows? I don't think Brad Stevens will ever overtake Popovich while he's still in the NBA, but I can't say he won't because he is an incredible coach, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing is, maybe I overstated it by saying he was going to be the best coach ever, but I think he is one of those coaches that is the next in line as one of the young coaches because he's only 41.
Yeah, he's a young
So in
dude.
coaching years, this is really, really good.
That's real young.
That's real young. And I think he is going to be one of those coaches that'll coach until he's like at least 70 or 80, I believe. I think he's going to be like Popovich type of numbers.
Yeah.
If we look at even just his win record since he arrived in the league till now, I guess we won't count this season, but we'll count the 2016 season. So he was 25-57 in his first season. Then he went 40-42, so a big improvement from that year to the next year. He then went 48-34, a winning record finally, to last year where he had the best record in the East at 53-29. So obviously his coaching, his players, they've all bought into the system.
Yeah.
He's had guys like Marcus Smart since he was young. He's had Isaiah Thomas for a couple years. And I just think this team right now is playing one of the best basketballs since a long time for the Celtics.
Yeah.
Not just the whole NBA, but just for the Celtics in a long time because of the coaching that Brad Stevens has done. And he's just a great dude. I don't see there's no malice. There's no anger from him. I feel like he's one of those cool, calm, and collected coaches that respects his players. And obviously the results show that the players respect him because they're playing their butts off when they're down 18 points and they come back.
They're playing their butts off. Yeah, and I'll say too, like Popovich, as great of a coach he is, he has great, all-time great NBA players who play for him, but it seems like they always start with him and then they stay there, you know?
Right.
He doesn't get a lot of, big free agents to come to San Antonio, which some might say that that's probably his choice, which I agree. He kind of wants to keep it in-house probably a little bit. Mm-hmm. And usually he doesn't need the biggest free agent because he pretty much he's super good. He's like the Bill Belichick. He makes the most out of every single player he gets. And I'm going to get a little bit more into that point with Brad Stevens in a second. But I personally do think that some players like LeBron James, for example, doesn't necessarily, as much as he respects Popovich, he doesn't necessarily want to play for Greg Popovich
Right.
because he knows he can never be the boss with Greg Popovich.
Right.
So I think the same kind of thing will happen with Brad Stevens to some extent because when it comes down to it, LeBron isn't play calling over Brad Stevens.
Right.
So, but I do think that more people are going to want to play with Brad Stevens because I do think he has a little bit more of a new age basketball coaching mentality
Right.
in the same way that Steve Kerr does. Where I think he's going to get people like he got Gordon Hayward, and I mean part of the fact that he got Gordon Hayward is he coached him in college too.
Right.
But it is a good sign that he can get a big name free agent to come play in Boston. But going back to what I was saying, look at the statistical averages for the players that play for him and after they leave what they do. Look at Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder from this year to last, his stats are way down everywhere. And
Exactly.
especially like defensively. And I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I said that Jay Crowder was going to be great for Cleveland, and I do think he brings a lot to that team.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that I personally, as well as a lot of people took into consideration how much better he was made by the fact that Brad Stevens was his coach. And Jay Crowder is a really good example. And I think that the big question is if we're going to see Isaiah Thomas have a big dip in his efficiency and his offensive performance because he doesn't have Brad Stevens as his coach. And I think we're going to. Like, I think, like, you have Avery Bradley who left, who's not playing bad for Detroit, but he's not playing as good as he did for Boston either.
No.
Though. So these players, he maximizes their potential while he has them, and then he seemingly knows when to let them go.
Right. I mean, that's
great coaching.
I mean, that like you said, it's indicative of great coaching. He's obviously cares about his players. Players played their hearts out and they played to their potential, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people were questioning that trade between Kyrie, Isaiah, and Jay Crowder and all them, which I think goes back to that point that I still think that the Celtics won that trade.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like I said before, maybe this year they'll be different because of how I think the Cavaliers will go on to the NBA Finals compared to the Celtics.
Yeah.
But we definitely won't see numbers like Isaiah put up in Boston. I don't think that at all.
I don't think so either.
I think people negate the fact that Brad Stevens is a really good coach.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at his record, it's indicative of that. Going from a losing season to doubling the wins to a winning record and then to the best record in just the 4 years. 3 years.
Certainly a far and away better coach than Tyronn Lue.
Yeah. I mean, Tyronn Lue is just a joke as a coach. I mean, he does have some basketball knowledge, and I'm not going to knock him for that.
Mm-hmm.
But compare him to Brad Stevens, I think it's a lot different.
It's apples and oranges. And I mean, not even apples and oranges because they're both good. I mean, it's more like, I don't even know how to, Jesus Christ, that was awful. Yeah, he's not anywhere near the league that Brad Stevens is, coaching ability-wise.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you some credit, all right? I will say this. I do think Boston won the trade, all right, which we had a debate about on this channel a little while ago. And I didn't necessarily say that Boston won or Cleveland won or, vice versa or whatever the case. I more said that we need to wait and see what Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder are going to do as the season progresses.
Right.
But I do think what it boils down to is Boston won because they got the much better player and a player that is going to affect the game much greater in Boston than he ever could with the system in Cleveland.
Right.
But I'll say this for Cleveland, they had to get rid of him.
Yeah. I mean that's the thing. Like, obviously, there had to be a trade. Kyrie was not happy. He wanted to be his own guy.
Mm-hmm.
He don't want to be under LeBron anymore.
They got a lot out of him too.
Yeah.
That pick for Brooklyn, which isn't probably going to be as good as they thought it was, is still going to be a good pick. And Isaiah Thomas is still going to be. He's going to be good. He's a good player.
Yeah.
He's just not going to be great the way he was in Boston.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that, and I think I've said it before, is just the offense was centered around him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Al Horford was a second option. I mean, Al Horford was a low second option.
Yeah.
So Isaiah Thomas was always on the pick and rolls, always dishing out.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really dish out as much, but he was scoring more because he was able to drive to the rim very well off pick and rolls.
And he was always their option in the fourth
Yeah.
quarter, too.
So, I mean, like, he's been utilized very well by Brad Stevens. Now the question is, will LeBron, or I guess if you really want to say Tyronn Lue, will they do the same?
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure about that. I think it's more of LeBron's team, and I think he will take the last shot
Yeah.
because he has a pretty good game-winning record
Yeah.
in terms of game-winning shots. So, I mean, we'll see about that. But just going back to the Brad Stevens point, I mean, there's nothing else we could really say about it. Just a great coach, great dude overall. I mean, look at guys like Jaylen Brown. From his first season, where everyone thought he was going to be like the bust of the draft,
Mm-hmm.
to being probably one of the better picks in that draft.
Seriously.
I mean, everyone was questioning it. They were like, okay, this kid, he doesn't really do anything. He's just athletic, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But now Brad Stevens has turned him into a defender. He's turned him into a better scorer. I mean, although it's because Gordon Hayward's out,
Yeah.
he's getting more minutes and more points out there. He's still maturing on the court. He's still growing as a player.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the results of it because Brad Stevens is that good of a coach.
Totally agree. I think it is hard to debate that Brad Stevens is the second best coach in the league, though.
Yeah.
Trying to even think of who would be in contention. Spoelstra is a great coach too, though.
Yeah, I think Spoelstra is an underrated coach.
He's up and he's in the top 5.
I just think people have just saw that, LeBron was on the Heat and that's why he won. I think he's a great coach.
He's a great coach.
But, I mean, other than that, I can't really think of any. Maybe Jeff?
Oh, Stan Van Gundy.
Is it Stan Van Gundy or is it Jeff?
Yeah, Stan, coach of Detroit.
Yeah.
Stan, great coach. He could end up being coach of the year, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, the Pistons are playing out of their mind right now.
I'm just even trying to think of other coaches. Hornacek is doing a pretty good job right now.
That's not bad. But I think
D'Antoni doing a good job in Houston.
D'Antoni doing a great job in Houston. Steve Kerr, obviously, you have him.
No,
I think he's a good coach.
He's a good coach. I agree. I think he's like the better version of Tyronn Lue, where he like is very good at keeping the locker room together, and he's like just a step ahead of him as far as like coaching ability is concerned.
Right.
He's a glue coach. All right, let's move on. What are we talking about next?
Let's move on to something I think we will be very different in opinions on.
Okay, I'm interested.
We're going to be talking about the Houston Rockets right now.
All right.
So obviously, as you know, the Houston Rockets, they're playing out of their mind. They're playing great.
Incredible 92-point first half a couple nights ago.
Yeah, I mean, awesome. We're going to be talking about Chris Paul and his fit in this Houston Rockets team.
Okay.
So if we remember the first game, it wasn't very good.
It was a small sample size. Didn't get a lot of it, but not very good. I agree.
Not very good. Now that he's back in the lineup, what do you think? I mean, obviously you think that he's a great fit. So I want to know why you think he's a great fit for this team.
I'll say this. I keep fucking saying that today. I didn't think he was a great fit. I was in agreement with you before the season started, and especially after that first game. But I jumped on the bandwagon real quick after that first game. Just seeing what the two of them were capable of on the court together, Chris Paul and James Harden, that is. And like we said, the potential of a lot of the players on their team, I think Chris Paul he's a great fit because he really is not going to demand a lot scoring-wise.
Okay.
I mean, he's like, what is he, an 18-point average career player?
Yeah, 18 and like 9 assists.
That's not a
Or
ton. That's not a ton.
10. Mm-hmm.
But he does demand the ball a lot, which was our big problem with him and James Harden, because James Harden needs the ball in his hands.
Right. He is the point guard, basically.
And they also have Eric Gordon, who's having a great year too, he's awesome on the ball, great scorer this year too. So that's a big problem too, like fitting those three guys who are kind of ball heavy, and then they shoot a lot too, and they like to pass and get their assists up. But I just loved what I see like offensively from that team. Like Chris Paul made Ryan Anderson so much better. I think some of his passing just opened up doors that like James Harden is capable of doing, but sometimes like he doesn't always choose to because he does like to score first.
Mm-hmm.
But he is such a talented passer as well that he's capable of it. But I think Chris Paul focuses on the passing just a little bit more than James Harden. So if they had it set up where not necessarily like Chris Paul's coming off the bench, but more so like the minutes that James Harden isn't dominating the game, Chris Paul is taking over the ball duties and he's, dishing it up. I think this team offensively is capable of anything. They can score with the Warriors for sure. For sure. That's just my opinion. I think they're kind of complete everywhere. Like they have really good like 3-point scoring. They have Anderson, Ariza, Harden can score from 3 easy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're dishing up assists like none other. They're good in the paint with Clint Capella. I like it, dude. I like this team.
Yeah.
He is not happy with what I just said, guys. If you can't see his disdain for me on his face right now, he's not a fan of what I just said about the Rockets.
I think the Rockets are really good, but I think Chris Paul made a mistake going to Houston. Like I said before in one episode of The Charge, I can't remember which one. I just think it's a bad fit. I think Chris Paul is a slower player than the rest of the team. The team likes to move up and down the court. Meanwhile, Chris Paul is a more slow it down, let's set up an offense.
Yeah.
And the thing I don't like about Chris Paul is that he's not a spot-up shooter.
Yeah.
So he definitely won't be one of those guys that when Harden has the ball, he'll just spot him and pass it over to someone else, especially Chris Paul, and shoot a shot. I know it's a small sample size right now, but, with the 3 games he played, the 3 games he started, he's shooting around 40%, which is way below his average. This is probably the lowest he shot in his career.
Chris Paul?
Yeah.
I mean, mind you, he's probably only taken 50 total shots.
I mean, you could say that, but still, you should be able to make most of your shots. He's averaging about the average. So I don't think he's doing very well in terms of being, like I said, he's not a spot-up shooter, so he's not able to shoot the ball very well.
Yeah. I don't know.
More personal fouls than ever. 3.7. Not good.
Mm-hmm.
His steals are, still were world-class because he's that good of a defender. But other than that, his assists are down. Since I think the last time he had like 8.7 assists or something lower than that was his first 2 seasons in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
I just think Chris Paul needed to be on a team that's much slower paced. I think the Cavs probably would have been a more perfect fit than this Rockets team.
Mm-hmm.
I think this Rockets team is a lot more fast-paced. James Harden likes to have the ball, and he likes to have spot-up shooters everywhere because he's the one who's going to be driving in and kicking it out to people and not Chris Paul, because Chris Paul is not reliable that way. I will say Chris Paul is a great defender. I'm not knocking him for that, but I just don't think that Chris Paul fits in this scheme of an offense. I think he's too slow for D'Antoni. I think D'Antoni wanted a faster point guard. And obviously Chris Paul, in my opinion, is not that guy.
Okay, let me give you a counterpoint, some strategic counterpoints, all right?
Okay.
So we've discussed a few times how to beat this Warrior style of offense, right? And I think a good way to counter that is to slow the pace down to your tempo.
Even so, if you slow the pace down with Chris Paul, it harms the rest of the team with James Harden, Clint Capella, and all those guys. Those guys want to move. The premise of the Houston offense is score as many points as we can, and it's the D'Antoni offense, 24 seconds or less. It's like that. You want to only take a certain amount of time off the shot clock so you can get more threes up than the Warriors. I just don't think that Chris Paul fits the scheme if that's what the Warriors want to run as their scheme.
Yeah,
and that's my counterpoint to your counterpoint.
I understand that you don't think that he's fitting the scheme, right? But I think you're thinking about it too one-dimensionally from my perspective. Because James Harden can't be on the court the entire game. No player can be on the court the entire game in a 7-game series against any team. LeBron James has the best chance, and even he's not doing it, right?
Okay.
So you need to think of your other lineups, your second team, who's playing. And if you have a lineup where, let's say you can have Chris Paul, not necessarily come off the bench, but he can be the leader of the second team, where you put out this more defensive lineup, because people aren't giving a lot of credit to Houston's defense. Their defense is really good. It's getting better. And Chris Paul, like you said, is an elite defender from the point guard position. So you put him out there and you let him run a slower tempo. Like, let's say it is getting out of hand, because sometimes when you're playing a team like the Warriors, even Houston isn't keeping up offensively with Golden State. Mm-hmm. So you put out Chris Paul in this slower tempo lineup that's more defensive focused, and you kind of let him just hold the ball, drain the clock down, and then it brings the game back to this slow tempo for a minute, and then both of the first teams gets out, where Harden comes out. You have Steph Curry and all these, 3-point shooters. It's just like, if this team is hot, you need to have somebody who can fix the defense, get us back to a level playing field, kind of, right? And James Harden is not a good defender.
No.
He chooses not to play defense. So in the cases where you need the defense and he's just getting outscored and he's not getting the buckets that they need, Chris Paul is a really good option because he's the opposite kind of player. He's not the uber fast tempo player who takes 15 threes. He slows the game down, gets you steals, puts up good passes into the places where people aren't expecting it. I think he's a great shot, honestly. I wish I had thought about him more in that context before I said he was going to be a bad fit.
But even if we're going with the Warriors example, I still think the Warriors are a better half-court team if you slow it down.
I'm not saying this makes Houston better. That's not what I'm saying. I just think it is.
I just think it's a bad fit for what Houston wants to do. If they want to be NBA champions, they should have gotten someone else than Chris Paul. I don't think he's a great fit. I don't think because D'Antoni is setting a scheme up to where he wants every one of these guys, from Eric Gordon to Clint Capella to Zhao Qi to Chris Paul to Troy Williams. They need to speed the tempo up. He's telling all these guys what tempo he likes to run. And I don't know why D'Antoni signed off on Chris Paul. Maybe he signed off because he thinks that he's a good point guard and that his stats are really good. But I just don't think with the way that D'Antoni likes to run his system, he's definitely not a Steve Nash of that team. I think he's a lot better defender than Steve Nash. But offensively, I don't think it's anywhere close to Steve Nash.
Well, I think based on just their offensive game, they don't really need Chris Paul to score a bunch. That's not why he's there, If they expected him to score,
then that was a waste. That's a waste of money then.
That's not everything in the NBA, though. Not everything is just score.
But that's D'Antoni's way, though. D'Antoni likes to score. And if you're going to pay $24 million for a dude like Chris Paul, I want more than just defense. I want offense and defense. Or your offense needs to be superb like James Harden's if you want to get paid that much money for a system that doesn't work for you. I want a lot more out of Chris Paul.
Well, maybe D'Antoni realizes that he can't just go with the offense, because you're not going to beat Golden State with just offense. Maybe they're trying to think of it like outside of the box, not just like D'Antoni going with his old school system, like all we can do is score against these teams. They're never going to beat the Warriors like that. There's no question that even if they got somebody who's a better scorer than Chris Paul, there is no way that they are going to outscore Golden State on a night-in, night-out basis. They need to be better on defense, and they need to be able to score. So just saying, like, we need somebody who can score, be an elite scorer on the team, doesn't fix the problem with Golden State. They're not going to win. They need to have somebody who can play defense, and Chris Paul can play fucking great defense.
Yeah, but none of the other guys can. I mean...
Maybe that's the problem they're trying to fix. Maybe that's why they got Chris Paul. Maybe they're like, this guy can dish up 10 assists a night and play great defense for 25 minutes.
I don't know. I just don't think it works. Chris Paul is a player that, like you said, he's a great defender. Nothing wrong with that. But the other guys just don't fit his scheme. I don't think Trevor Ariza doesn't fit that scheme. Trevor Ariza is a scorer.
Trevor Ariza is great on defense too, man.
He's not that good. I think he's
overrated. He can guard any.
Not at his. He's like 32.
Dude, he's a great defender. You're undercrediting.
No, I think he's overrated defensively. If he was that great of a defender, why did Houston not even compete in that series?
Because all they do is score with D'Antoni. So maybe that's why they got Chris Paul, and maybe that's why they're trying to focus on defense more this year. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they're like, they've realized that what they were doing was never winning the championship, which is a fair assumption to make, Did it look like they even had a chance last year?
Well, to be fair, no one did have a chance, and that's
So maybe they're trying to come up with a new plan. Maybe there's something else other than just like, let's try and score 130 points every night. Maybe let's try and hold these teams under 105 for a game or two.
I mean, if that was the case, then James Harden wouldn't be the point guard still. He would let the reins go to Chris Paul if that's like your defensive solution. You would have Chris Paul take the reins and you would slow the game down.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course. Like I said, James Harden is a top 3 player in the NBA. You're not going to take the reins out of his hands, you know? He's that good. But when it comes down to James Harden outscoring Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, it's not happening. So they need to have another option when that isn't working. Because James Harden, he can try his hardest, and I'm sure he could do it a couple nights, you know. He has a chance to do it when he has a game where he's accounted 90 points for the team, you know,
Right.
through assists and scoring. But you need somebody who can come in there and do something other than just score and not play defense. Because, like, James Harden can't guard Steph Curry. He can't guard him.
Yeah, obviously.
So Chris Paul is a much better shout to, like, you have both of them on the court. James Harden, go out there and score 40. Chris Paul, you defend Steph Curry and don't let him score more than 25 points. So then James Harden's defense isn't such a liability on the court at that moment.
Okay.
That's just I don't know, man. I think just getting stuck, like, Houston, I'm being dead serious. If all they think about is how we can score more points than Golden State, they're never going to win. So I really hope that that's not their game plan. You might be right. If that's their game plan, they're not winning more than 2 games against Golden State.
Yeah.
Not a chance.
I know I was high on them and I said 4-3, but I mean it's 4-3 if they decide to change their game. But it looks to me watching them. I mean, even just watching their games, they scored 90 points in the first half. They're still offensive focused.
There's nothing wrong with being offensive
And that's
focused.
not, like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. But if your goal is to outscore the Warriors, then I don't think Chris Paul was the right guy to bring in.
Okay.
And that's all I have to say about that. Because I think Chris Paul, phenomenal player. I always love him. But if that was the case with Chris Paul, that Clippers team should have won a championship in one of those years. And I just don't think that Chris Paul is that second option dude for the Rockets team.
He might not be, though. He might not even be their second option because Clint Capella is pretty good too.
Yeah, but he's more of a putback type of guy. I mean, he's like almost a DeAndre Jordan-like guy,
He's better than DeAndre Jordan, though.
but has a better shot than DeAndre Jordan. But I don't know. I'm just not convinced with this team with Chris Paul in it. I just think a different point guard was needed. If you wanted to bring in a point guard, honestly, in my opinion, I would have brought in some sort of small forward. I don't know if there was any on the market. I can't remember. But I would have rather brought in a small forward than a Chris Paul type point guard. And maybe that's what they were trying to do with Carmelo. Because, I mean, if you think about it, the rumor was Carmelo was going to go to the Rockets.
I think they
And then that would have been you would have seen the focus of that team would have been offense.
It would have been only offense, and I think they would have gotten destroyed by a team like the Warriors if that was their plan. Because look at what Carmelo's doing. Like, I love him to death, but like that game plan just doesn't work.
No.
It doesn't work. So putting a player in an offense-first system who's literally tries to make the entire offense revolve around him while he still makes poor decisions isn't. You're not beating the Warriors like that. You're not even beating the Spurs like you're not beating the Spurs like that either. Because they're not going to go out and just try and outscore you. They're going to defend the fuck out of you too. Kawhi is going to shut down anything like that. I mean, we'll just see what happens. I am leaning towards the side of I think they brought in Chris Paul with the intention of him not being a scoring point guard. They want him to do the other things that he's exceptional at and fix those facets of the Houston Rockets game.